everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. 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 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. Oh, there's something about your love. Something about your love changes everything in my body. Oh, something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. 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 Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything.
Good morning, Rooted Men. Pastor Tom, Firmly Rooted Ministries here at the office. And we're going to do something a little bit different as we go into the end of the year and into 2025. Today, we're going to begin a devotion about Abram, who will soon become Abraham. And we're going to study some men of Scripture, whether they're going to be in the Judges or in Genesis or wherever they might be. We're going to focus on some men. And so I got to tell Steve Giroux and Matt Ryan and others who might do these devotions, we're going to hit longer sections. And so the key is maybe not to read the whole section, but talk about it and then narrow in on some verses that maybe impact you. But we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 12. And this is where God calls Abram, which was his name before he became Abraham. And we're going to do this. And I think it worked out in my spreadsheet that we're going to do this right till the end of this year. So Abraham, from now until the end of the year on Rooted Men, we're going to be looking at the life of Abraham. But let's say hi to a few people. And by the way, I hope that you had a chance to either be at worship and Bible study yesterday or had a chance to see it or be a part of it online. But a lot of great comments. I think, things are getting better. We're getting more in control of our audio and video. If you're someone who worshiped maybe online, I'd like to hear whether sound and video were good. All right, let's see who's on board. Besides me, there's Chuck. Shalom, gentlemen. Chris Connolly, good morning. Shane, good morning. Steve Giroux, good morning. Bert Reggiani, good morning. Good morning. And well, there's more of you out there because I can see you. But welcome. I'm glad you're here. All right, I'm going to pull up Genesis chapter 12, and we're going to begin at verse 1. And you'll notice it's the call to Abram, his original name. We'll get to it later, but when he calls him Abraham, he's changed his name to the father of many, even though he hasn't had a promised child yet, a son yet. But we'll get to that in another reading. So now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Go." One of the things I want you to realize in just your memory of biblical history, look how often when God calls someone, they physically change their location, or they physically change their jobs, or they physically move in some way. It appears to me that I'm seeing more and more that anyone who truly desires to be a disciple of Jesus Christ and spend and steward time, talents, and treasures to his kingdom, you have to sacrifice time, talents, and treasures somewhere because you got the same 24 hours everybody else has. And so ultimately, I'm left with this choice to sacrifice time, talents, and treasures in the kingdom of this world, which is difficult because it can absorb all my time, it can absorb all my talents, and it can absorb all my treasures. So I'm required to have this discernment and knowing how to make that shift. But just notice, God didn't say, "Hey, Abraham, stay where you're at. I'm going to bless you." He says, "I'm taking you to a different place. You have to leave your country," right? Disciples, drop your nets, come follow me. Leave the tax booth, come follow me. He says, and look at these promises, "I will make you a great nation," not just a great family, not just a blessing for the now, but I'm going to make you a great nation. Well, there's a promise that's not going to appear or even happen in his lifetime. It's going to happen in his grandson's lifetime. And that is not even really going to happen until they're in Egypt and they actually become a nation while in slavery. But we'll get to that later too. So notice the blessings of God don't just talk about the moment. God's not only in control of Abram's life, but he knows where this is going because God sees all of eternity at the same time. "I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you will I curse. And you, all the families of the earth, in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed." There's another one. This idea that I'm going to bless those who bless you and I'm going to curse those who curse you is just this idea that my hand of favor is on you. And so someone who supports that will receive blessings from me. Someone who tries to go against me is going to get rebuffed. They're going to be cursed. They're going to be dishonored. And then he makes this statement In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Not just your families, not just your nation, but all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And I find it utterly amazing that God has made us look at Genesis chapter 12 today, which is exactly what we're going to look at in Advent devotion number 2. I mean, I didn't plan that out, but these very words are going to be repeated at 8:30. So Abraham went. There's obedience, right? And we got to ask ourselves, would we leave if God called us to move, if God called us to do something different, if God told us to sacrifice something, if God led us to some kind of decision? Do we waver? Do we say, oh, I can't do it? Do we try to negotiate with God and say, come on now, I'll meet you halfway? Abraham went as the Lord had told him. And his brother-in-law, Lot, went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. 75, not 17, not 27, 75 years old. And God calls Abram to be his and begins to develop a relationship with him. Abram took Sarah his wife and Lot his brothers and Lot his brother's son and all their possessions that they had gathered and the people that had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. There's the promised land, right? The land of Canaan, where the Canaanites and all the ites were. Abraham passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. And at that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abraham, Now, we don't know in verse 1, did he appear in a visible way? It just says he spoke to him. God spoke to him, but now he's appearing to him. And the Lord appeared to him and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. Not to you, to your offspring. Gentlemen, what if there are steps of obedience that we have to go through so that our children and their children and the children after them can be blessed? We're so myopic sometimes, and all we think about is our little bubble and our little lives. So he built there an altar to the Lord who appeared to him. I want you to focus on that word, built an altar. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they all seemed to, when they got contacted by God, they built an altar, a visible remembrance. What are we doing to visibly, physically remember God doing direct things in our lives? We don't do a very good job at it, hence we forget. But it's tough to forget when you're walking around or traveling your nation and you see these monuments all over the place because you can see where God has been active. From there, he moved to the hill country of the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar. There you go. So he built an altar again to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Now he is building an altar of which he's now calling to the very God who called him, right? Everything at first was God down to him, and he stepped in obedience. Now he's realizing that God wants communication both directions, and Abram needs that communication in both directions. So Abraham builds an altar where he probably can sacrifice an animal, that he can just meditate and be with God. And verse 9, Abraham journeyed on, still going to the Negev. Now, there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. And when he was entering Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, not Sarah, Sarai, I know that you are a woman, beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is my wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. And I think we're going to stop there at verse 12, because I think, make sure, Steve's got 12 to 20 tomorrow. So I'll tee this up for Steve. There's no communication with God about the famine. There's no record of Abraham saying to God, hey, I'm in a famine. There's no record of him calling on God and saying, should I go to Egypt? Not saying it was a bad decision. I'm just saying, notice he's making decisions on his own. And one of the decisions is to lie about his wife, who really is a sister, probably a half sister, but a sister. But he's trying to manipulate the situation. There's no reliance upon God to protect him. There's no reliance. He's not even turning to God and saying, hey, is this a good idea? Hey, I'm thinking about, treating my wife like my sister and saying that that's what she is. And I just want you to realize that Abraham, just like us, made decisions on the fly without asking God. And we do the same thing. And I'm going to leave it there and pull myself back into the screen. But gentlemen, maybe this is something to look at Advent, where we know that Jesus is coming. When are we experiencing winds and waves, and when are we experiencing storms, and when are we going through things and attempting to navigate them all by ourselves? Why is it always the last resort, when we're on our backs getting beat to a smithereens, that we finally say, hey, God, save me? Abraham's going to get himself into a little bit of trouble here because he is deceptive. He's lying. But he's lying to cover his behind. He thinks he's lying for good reasons, but he wouldn't have to lie at all if he had God's blessing. So what if more of our lives, gentlemen, was seeking God's wisdom and discernment and then moving, seeking what he would have for us and then going? Does that make sense? Abraham's not going to, this is not the only time Abraham's going to do this kind of thing, make a decision on his own and find out that he probably should not have made that decision, but he should have asked God if that's the decision he should make. I'm not telling you not to be assertive. I'm not telling you to, we have to be assertive. But we want to make sure when we assert something that God's behind it, blessing it. And so we should go to him first. We should make sure it's true to his word. All right. I think I'm going to leave it at that. Bert Reggiani, thank you. He says the service was good yesterday online. My cousin Dave Donnelly, Brian Vlaming, great to have you. I'll be back at 8:30, and we're going to read devotion number 2 from the Advent book. Again, hope you had a chance to be a part of the service yesterday. All right, very good. Blessings on your day. Make it a firmly rooted day, and may someone see Jesus in us today. Peace.